March 26, 1997. Rancho Santa Fe, California. Police officers push open the heavy wooden doors of a quiet suburban mansion. The blinds are drawn. The air is heavy, and silence hangs thick in every hallway. At first glance, it seems abandoned. But within moments, the smell hits them. Room after room reveals the same haunting sight. Bodies, 39 in total, lying neatly in bunk beds. Each one dressed the same. Black pants, black shirts, and identical brand new Nike sneakers. Their faces are covered with purple shrouds, their hands resting peacefully by their sides. It looks less like chaos and more like ritual. News crews descend within hours. Helicopters circle above. Headlines explode across the world. Mass suicide in California, 39 dead in a cult mansion. But what looked like a simple death pact would prove to be something far more disturbing. This was the chilling end of Heaven's Gate. A UFO cult convinced they were leaving Earth aboard a spaceship hidden behind a comet.
To understand how 39 people ended up dead in a California mansion, we need to go back more than 2 decades. Back to the beginning of Heaven's Gate, and to the man who created it. His name was Marshall Applewhite. Born in 1931 in Texas, Applewhite grew up the son of a Presbyterian minister. Religion shaped his childhood, but so did music. By the 1960s, he was a music professor, teaching at universities, directing choirs, and living what seemed like a normal life. But underneath, he struggled with identity, purpose, and personal demons. He was twice divorced, lost jobs over alleged misconduct, and by the early 1970s, suffered a complete breakdown. It was during this turbulent period that he met Bonnie Nettles, a nurse with a deep fascination for astrology, prophecy, and alternative spirituality. Their meeting was, by all accounts, life-changing. They quickly became inseparable friends, partners, and eventually co-leaders of a new spiritual path. They told followers they were the 2 prophetic figures mentioned in the Book of Revelation, chosen to guide humanity into the next stage of evolution. But their vision was different from traditional Christianity. They blended Bible verses with science fiction, New Age mysticism, and a growing fascination with UFOs. They told people that Earth was doomed to be recycled, wiped clean of all humanity. The only escape was to shed human attachments and prepare to ascend into what they called the next level, a higher plane of existence beyond this world. In 1975, Applewhite and Nettles began holding public meetings. Flyers were plastered across college campuses and small towns. They were simple, almost cryptic. UFOs, why they are here. 2 individuals say they have the answer. Curious seekers came in droves. Some thought it was a joke. Others were intrigued. At these meetings, Applewhite and Nettles claimed they were extraterrestrial beings in human bodies. They spoke with conviction, weaving prophecy with the language of space travel. And to a surprising number of people, it was convincing. The mid-1970s were fertile ground for alternative religions. The hippie era had left many disillusioned with traditional structures. The New Age movement promised cosmic answers. The counterculture was obsessed with higher consciousness, reincarnation, and aliens. Applewhite and Nettles fit right in. They began attracting followers, students, young adults, even professionals. People sold their possessions, abandoned families, and joined the pair on the road. They camped in the desert, moved from town to town, living communally, waiting for the day they would be taken to the stars. The group was first called Human Individual Metamorphosis. Later, they adopted the name that would become infamous, Heaven's Gate. Their message was radical, but it gave followers something priceless: certainty. In a chaotic world, Applewhite and Nettles offered purpose, belonging, and the ultimate promise that death was not the end, but the beginning of life among the heavens. For the next 2 decades, that promise would hold them captive. The group that would become Heaven's Gate was never meant to be small. From the very beginning, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles believed their teachings were world-changing, and they weren't afraid to share them. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the two crisscrossed the United States, holding small recruitment meetings in community centers, libraries, and even living rooms. Their flyers were strange but compelling. UFOs, why they are here. 2 individuals say they have the answer. Curiosity brought people in, and when Applewhite spoke, he did so with conviction. His voice rose and fell with emotion, his piercing eyes scanning the room, as he promised salvation from a doomed world. Nettles, calm and steady, played the balance, framing their mission as a spiritual calling, wrapped in the language of science fiction and prophecy. It wasn't just about aliens, it was about purpose. Applewhite and Nettles told people they were special, that they could be chosen to escape Earth's destruction and ascend to the next level. For those disillusioned by jobs, family life, or a chaotic world, the promise was intoxicating. By the end of the 1970s, dozens of people had joined them. Followers sold their belongings, cut ties with families, and adopted new names. They traveled in caravans, camped in remote areas, and lived communally. Many recruitment stories shocked outsiders. In one case, a married couple with children left home after attending just a single Heaven's Gate meeting, abandoning their family for the promise of cosmic salvation. In another, a successful software developer in California walked away from a lucrative job to live in a tent in the desert with Applewhite and Nettles. For them, the certainty and belonging outweighed everything they left behind. Rules were strict: no drugs, no alcohol, no relationships, no sex. Celibacy was demanded of all. Families were considered distractions, even enemies of spiritual growth. Members dressed alike, ate the same meals, and spoke in coded language. To sever ties with their old selves, each member took on a new name, often ending with Odie, a reminder that their human bodies were only temporary vehicles. Daily life was highly regimented. They rose early, followed a shared schedule of chores, and ate simple meals, often vegetarian. Conversations were monitored, and even facial expressions were expected to remain calm and neutral. There was little laughter, little anger, only discipline. Members studied Applewhite's lessons for hours each day, rehearsing how to let go of human ways. Uniformity was not just encouraged, it was enforced. Members cut their hair short. They wore identical outfits. They were expected to suppress individuality in every possible way. In Applewhite's words, "You must rid yourself of all human ways, all human thoughts, all human behavior." And yet, contradictions ran deep. Applewhite preached detachment from material possessions, but Heaven's Gate funded itself by embracing the new digital age. The group became early internet entrepreneurs, building websites and offering web development services under the name Higher Source. They worked on projects for businesses, churches, and individuals, sometimes commanding high fees. Members became skilled coders and designers, quietly operating in the background of the booming dot-com era. It was ironic. The cult that demanded followers abandon the world relied on one of its most modern inventions to survive. And in a strange twist, it gave them something cults rarely had: financial stability. By the 1980s, tragedy struck. Bonnie Nettles died of cancer. For many cults, the loss of a leader would have spelled collapse. But Applewhite spun her death as proof of their teachings. He told followers that Nettle's spirit had successfully transcended to the next level. Her death was not a failure, it was validation. From then on, Applewhite became the unquestioned leader. His teachings grew stricter, more apocalyptic, and more bizarre. He warned that Earth was about to be recycled, destroyed in a cosmic cleansing. Only by rejecting human identity and following him could anyone hope to survive.
Out to be recycled. Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us.
And Applewhite's control went even deeper. In the early 1990s, a small group of male members voluntarily underwent surgical castration at a local hospital, believing celibacy would help them transcend. Applewhite himself eventually followed suit. The act was shocking, but to them, it was an ultimate sign of devotion. The group lived in near-total isolation. Contact with outsiders was rare. Families were cut off. Letters were burned. The outside world, they believed, was hopelessly corrupt. Heaven's Gate members spent their days coding websites, recording video lessons, and listening to Applewhite preach about their imminent graduation. And then, in 1995, came a sign from the heavens. Astronomers announced the discovery of the Hale-Bopp comet, the brightest and most visible comet in modern history. For most of the world, it was a scientific wonder, a once-in-a-lifetime cosmic event. But for Applewhite, it was prophecy fulfilled. He declared that the comet was a signal. Behind it, hidden from human eyes, was a spacecraft. That craft, he told his followers, would carry them to the next level. The catch? To board it, they would have to shed their human bodies. Applewhite framed death not as an end, but as a graduation, a glorious transformation, and his followers, after decades of conditioning, isolation, and indoctrination, were ready to believe. They began preparing for the day when they would leave their containers, their human bodies, behind. By the mid-1990s, Applewhite made a major decision. After decades of living in campsites, motels, and small rentals, the group would move into a permanent home where they could make their final preparations in secrecy. Using income from their web design company, Higher Source, Heaven's Gate leased a sprawling 9,200 square foot mansion in the wealthy suburb of Rancho Santa Fe, California. The property, nicknamed the monastery, offered them everything they needed: privacy, space, and distance from curious neighbors. Curtains were drawn, windows sealed, rooms divided into sleeping quarters, common areas, and their small computer lab. Inside, the group lived with absolute discipline, waiting for the sign they believed would take them to the next level. And in 1997, as the Hale-Bopp comet blazed across the night sky, Applewhite told his followers the signal had finally arrived. March 1997. Inside the Rancho Santa Fe mansion, nicknamed the monastery, everything was quiet. Curtains drawn, windows sealed. Members of Heaven's Gate spent their final days in complete order, following Marshall Applewhite's every instruction. For months, Applewhite had been telling them the sign would soon appear. Now, with the Hale-Bopp comet blazing in the night sky, he declared the moment had finally come. The craft, he said, was here to collect them. All they had to do was prepare their vehicles for the transition. Applewhite himself recorded what would become known as the exit videos. Sitting in front of a plain backdrop, his pale face framed by harsh light, his eyes wide, he explained with conviction that the time had arrived. His voice wavered between calm assurance and desperate urgency. "We are at the end of our time. The comet is the sign we've been waiting for. Behind it is the craft, ready to take us home." For outsiders, the words sounded like delusion. For his followers, after 20 years of conditioning, they were the final instructions from their teacher. The group spent days filming farewell messages, One by one, members sat before the camera and smiled. They spoke with joy, almost childlike excitement. Some thanked Applewhite for giving their lives meaning. Others said they were eager to leave the pain of Earth behind. To them, death was not tragedy. It was graduation. There was no trembling, no visible fear. Instead, there was peace. The plan was laid out with chilling precision. The group would exit in stages over several days in groups of 15 at a time. Each member wore the same uniform: black shirts, black pants, and a brand new pair of Nike Decade sneakers. Each one carried a small bag with personal items and a $5 bill in their pocket. Applewhite said it symbolized the fare for the journey. Their final meal together was simple but symbolic: turkey pot pie, salad, cheesecake. They ate quietly, without ceremony, as if it were an ordinary dinner. But afterwards, everything changed. When it was time, each member consumed a lethal mixture of phenobarbital, powdered down and mixed into applesauce or pudding. The bitter taste was washed down with vodka. Once they were unconscious, plastic bags were tied gently over their heads to ensure suffocation. It was brutal, but it was not chaotic. The surviving members cleaned up after each group. They laid the bodies neatly on their beds, covering them with purple shrouds. Shoes lined up perfectly at the foot of each bed. Arms folded peacefully across the chest. Then it was their turn. Over the course of 3 days, group by group, the community of Heaven's Gate carried out its plan. Smiling on tape one day, motionless under cloth the next. Finally, it was Applewhite's turn. The man who had spent decades preaching ascension, who had convinced others to abandon families, cut ties, surrender possessions, now faced the end himself. For him, there could be no hesitation. Applewhite took the same mixture, lay down, and joined his followers. When police eventually arrived on March 26th, after receiving an anonymous tip, they entered the mansion to find one of the most haunting crime scenes in American history. 39 bodies, each one draped in purple cloth, each one wearing identical sneakers, each one arranged with eerie precision, as if sleep had simply claimed them all at once. Reporters described it as both grotesque and disturbingly peaceful. Not a scene of violence, but of ritual. Outside, neighbors watched in disbelief. They remembered the group as quiet, polite, though a bit unusual. No one suspected that behind closed doors, a mass death was being orchestrated. Within hours, the story dominated the news. Helicopter footage of the Rancho Santa Fe mansion flashed across television screens around the world. Headlines called it the largest mass suicide in U.S. history. Anchors struggled to explain how educated adults, web designers, former professionals, sons and daughters, could end their lives so willingly. But to the members of Heaven's Gate, this was not suicide. In their minds, suicide was clinging to Earth when escape had been offered. What they had done was something different, something holy. They called it graduation. And in those final days, they believed with absolute certainty that they were stepping into the next level, boarding the craft they had been promised for more than 2 decades. When deputies entered the Rancho Santa Fe mansion on March 26, 1997, they didn't just discover 39 lifeless bodies. They uncovered one of the most disturbing chapters in modern American history. The scene was orderly, ritualistic, and haunting. Rows of bunk beds, each with a figure draped in purple cloth. Identical shoes at the foot of every bed. Plastic bags still clinging to faces. The air heavy with chemicals and silence. The images, though carefully controlled by investigators, leaked into the media. And within hours, the name Heaven's Gate was on every television screen in America. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters lined the street outside the mansion. Satellite trucks beamed live coverage around the world. It was the internet age colliding with mass death, and viewers could not look away. Anchors described it as the largest mass suicide ever to occur on U.S. soil. But others debated whether the word suicide was even accurate. Survivors and cult experts argued that what had taken place was not voluntary self-destruction, but decades of psychological manipulation culminating in obedience to one man. For the families, the horror was personal. Some had spent years trying to contact loved ones inside Heaven's Gate, writing letters, pleading for visits. Many had been cut off completely. Now, instead of reunions, they received phone calls from the coroner's office. Parents, siblings, and children traveled to California to identify bodies. Some families filed lawsuits against the estate of Heaven's Gate, alleging wrongful death and negligence. Others, consumed by grief, quietly buried their loved ones and tried to move forward. But not everyone saw the end of Heaven's Gate as tragedy. A handful of survivors who were not present in the mansion at the time continued to defend the group. They insisted that their fellow members had achieved something higher, something pure. To them, Applewhite had not been a manipulator but a guide. And perhaps most chilling of all, Heaven's Gate did not disappear entirely. To this day, the official Heaven's Gate website remains online, maintained by two former members who were not in Rancho Santa Fe when the mass death occurred. The site has barely changed since 1997. It still contains Applewhite's writings, the farewell letters, and the group's teachings. In the words of its keepers, it will remain active until it is time to join our older members in the next level. In many ways, the internet, an invention the group once used to sustain themselves financially, became their eternal tombstone. For the wider world, the Heaven's Gate tragedy sparked urgent questions about cults, belief, and control. How could intelligent adults, web developers, teachers, fathers, daughters, surrender their lives so willingly? What conditions create the kind of devotion that overrides the human instinct for survival? Cult experts point to isolation, loss of individuality, and the slow erosion of critical thinking. Over decades, Applewhite dismantled his followers' identities and rebuilt them in his image. By the time the Hale-Bopp comet arrived, death no longer looked like the end. It looked like the only way out. And so, 39 lives ended in silence inside a mansion in California. But the story of Heaven's Gate continues to echo, not just as a bizarre headline, but as a warning about the dangers of unchecked belief, a warning about the vulnerability of the human mind, and a warning that even in an age of technology and reason, people can still be led to destruction by the promise of something greater. Heaven's Gate stands as a chilling reminder of how far belief can be twisted, and how devastating blind faith can become. And if you think this story is disturbing, you need to see what happened at Jonestown. A tragedy on a scale even greater than Heaven's Gate. That video is popping up on your screen right now. Click it and discover why Jonestown still haunts history today. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next cult we're covering is even more bizarre, more brutal, and more shocking than anything you've seen so far.
And let you know that what we're about to do is certainly nothing to think negatively about. We're all choosing of our own free will to go to the next level with tea and dough.
We don't know what's going to happen after we leave. We don't know how much longer this civilization is even going to continue on. And so all this may be mute, but whatever time it's worth, that's why we're saying these things.
People would just know that we're not forced into this in any way. It's, our own choosing to do it. And I'm really happy that I made this choice, because there was a lot of things kind of working against me not to, I'm sure. I know there was. People in the world who thought that I had completely lost my marbles. They're not right. I couldn't have made a better choice.
It's the same thing happening again. T and O are the way and the truth and the only source of life. And without our connection to T and O, we have nothing. So Christians miss it when they read the Bible, and they just don't get it because the atmosphere is so filled with misinformation. But it's so plain and simple and real and true for us. And we know it. You may not know it, which is okay. We have no fear. We're proud and looking forward to what's ahead. And we believe all our classmates feel the same way.
Actually, they couldn't. You all couldn't really know it unless you have had done what we had done and been through what we had been through. But I think you can trust. I guess you could trust our judgment in this.
That's probably